welcome to Malvern Books. Thank you all so much for being here. We're very excited to have Bonnar Spring here for this reading. Bonnar Spring is the author of the novel Toward the Light. A nomad at heart, she hitchhiked across Europe at 16 and joined the Peace Corps after college. She lives in a tiny house on a New Hampshire salt marsh. Please welcome Bonnar.
Thanks, Chandra. I'd first like to thank actually Malvern Books a whole bunch. When I was first designing this book tour, and I asked a blogger who was interviewing me, like, where should I look in Austin, for good reading? She said, well, Malvern Books, it's a great community bookstore, and they do really interesting events. I thought, oh, wow, that's cool. And they really are. They're a great community bookstore. They have book clubs for every taste. They run open mic nights. They've got sometimes second Wednesday of each month they do sort of an open author, not exactly open. They let authors come in and talk about their books and stuff like that. And they host a lot of individual writers who come through town. I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And for everybody here, friends and family, etc., thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming out in the rain tonight. I know there are a lot of things you could be doing, like having dinner and doing fun things, but you came out to hear me talk for a little while, and then there's some refreshments over there. I'll talk first, and then we all get to talk together, okay? This is the first time I've ever done a talk with so many people who know me. That's right. So I'm like kind of terrified that I'm going to say something. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. It's sort of my journey to becoming a writer, okay? But I'm like terrified that somebody is going to, like, I'm looking at you, Jay Johnson, is going to raise their hand and say, that's not the way it was. So if you want to argue with me, at least wait until after I've done my piece. Maybe I've done a couple of softball questions, I'm sort of rolling, okay? And then we can discuss things. So, we're here tonight because I wrote a book called Toward the Light. It's my first published novel, but I've been writing short stories for a while, and I had them published. The difference is that when you publish a short story, well, you write it first, obviously, and you submit it, and you get a rejection, or 2, or 10, or 20, but every once in a while somebody says, okay, sure, and I send you a check for $50. And that's the end of the story, basically. A novel is really different. I had to sign a contract promising to talk to people.
Even once you know.
Even people I know. And I've talked to a lot of people I actually don't know. It's not as bad as it was earlier, but it's still a little terrifying for me. The other thing is I had to join social media, so I've joined all these social media things, which is kind of weird. Anyhow, I'm going to talk really briefly about sort of how I got to this place. In doing so, I have to talk a little bit about who I was as a kid. So I'm going to briefly mention 3 things. The first is reading. Okay, like every writer except for one that I've ever met in my whole life, I grow up as a voracious reader. Okay? I don't think it's a requirement, but certainly most of us do. We have a sense of story, we want to hear stories, we want to tell stories. And that's certainly how I grew up. Now the way I remember it, every 2 weeks, we got taken to the Terrell Park Branch Library. Yeah, okay, I'm getting nods. Okay, about every 2 weeks, we went to the Terrell Park Branch Library, and we got to check out books. Well, they had this policy that you could only get 14 books at a time. So I got mine. And I was getting, Nancy Drew, basically. YA for women particularly has changed a whole lot since those of us who were a certain age were kids. So I get my share of Nancy Drews, which I loved, and a few other things. But when I was done, what did I do? I read my brother's books. Okay? Now I'm thinking more of Jay because he was more of an age where we had similar reading levels at that time. This is the end of the golden age of science fiction. So I'm reading, what are we reading? Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Philip K. Dick, Paul Anderson, all of those things. I read them as fast as Jay would give them to me. Okay, it was great. I read my mom's books. She was heavy into, dramatic historical fiction. Okay, let's call it that. and also romantic suspense. Daphne du Maurier and all that stuff. Now, my father didn't read as much as we did. And Laura and I shared this story a few days ago. But I did discover a cache of paperbacks on the top shelf in the den behind the hardcovers. And they were very interesting books. Right. Anyhow, that was the first part. The second thing I need to talk about is travel. And I think I'm going to start this by saying that my brothers and I were really fortunate to grow up with a really adventurous mother. Today would have been her 99th birthday. And she hasn't been with us for a year and a half now. But when we were kids, she thought absolutely nothing of packing us up in the station wagon and the dog and heading for who knows where. We used to go away all summer, pretty much every summer. Okay, sometimes it was like to visit our grandparents in New York. Well, for a kid from South Texas, that was pretty weird too. But more often we went south. We went to Mexico, and I loved it down there. Just imagine. Maybe I won't ask you to imagine because you all live in South Texas. Okay? Just imagine that a day in a car and you're in a different country, right? There are kids there, speak different language, they eat different food. It was really weird. Think about science fiction in that different world. That different world was just a few miles away from our house. Anyhow, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the language. I enjoyed the culture change. I enjoyed just simply getting in a car and going someplace different, just like I'm doing this winter, actually. The third thing, really briefly, that I want to talk about is sort of situating myself in place and time. A writer who's been extremely helpful to my career, her name is Philippi Ryan. She's not well known in this market, but she's sort of a fixture in the Boston market. She's written 11 mysteries. Sort of is the doyen of the class of 1970. It's a very loose group of those of us who came of age in the 1960s and really were fledged long about 1970. So we grew up in the turmoil of that time. And what were we going to do? That's the first question of the evening. Class of 1970, change the world. Okay? So the way I was going to change the world, I joined the Peace Corps, and that's when I went into the Peace Corps. I taught English just because of other languages in a small town in Africa, and it was the best job, as the Peace Corps ad goes, the best job, the hardest job you'll ever love. Excuse me, I said that wrong. It was a career that I continued. I taught other things and did other things, but it was a career I continued until possibly right now, but I probably retired. Okay. I think I retired at this point in time. I always intended to write. I always assumed, I guess, I was going to write, but for so many years, fiction took a backseat to things I had to do for work. So, for example, I'm a teacher. I'm designing, writing curriculum, writing up lessons, and doing all that sort of thing. I did write some short stories, but that was about as much energy as I could devote to fiction. About 10 years ago, I decided to get serious, and here's Toward the Light, okay? The first novel that I've had published. I find it kind of difficult. People say, well, what's it about? And it's really kind of hard for me to say sometimes because I can tell you what the facts are about it, okay? But it's been out for just about 2 months now, and everyone in the reviews seems to be talking about something different. A lot of really people have talked about the setting. A lot of people mention the setting first. They like that. Some people talk about my main character. People want to talk about the politics involved. And when you read the reviews, they're sort of all over the place. Some people talk about the romance. It's not strictly speaking romance. It's an international thriller. But people will talk about different things. There's a young boy character. Some people like him. As it turns out, my publishers, the folks who run the publishing company, are both retired MDs. And they're very interested, I can't really divulge this because that would be telling. They're very interested in discussing some of the medical things that come up in it. So on the basis of that, I think Oh, I did a good job. There's a little something for everybody in there, by the way. If I were going to say what the book is about, I would say the following. A young girl is caught up in the violence of the Guatemalan Civil War, and she grows up as a refugee in the United States. Her name is Luz Concepcion. She goes to the United States with her mother, who's the only family that she has, only close family that she has left. And when her mother dies, she returns to Guatemala. And that's the setup. Okay, that's what happens in Toward the Light. Spanish speakers in the audience. There must be some. I know.
Un poco.
No. Creo que tú hablas mucho. Luz is a beautiful woman's name, a Spanish woman's name. And what does it mean?
Light.
Light. Okay, there's your first clue. Okay, this is not a test, but okay, that goes to theme, guys. Okay. Let's see. Why don't I transition to reading right now? When you read from fiction, it's really hard to do anything than read right from the beginning of the book. So that's where I'm going to start. Chapter 1, page 1. I forgot to say something. Okay, I'm going to put it in right here because I think it's important. That's a setup, but it does not go any further in explaining why Luz decides to return to Guatemala, what she does there, or anything about how it changes her life or affects her afterwards. That's really the story of Toward the Light. Okay, here we are, chapter 1. On a breezy autumn afternoon, Maria Luz Concepcion returned to Guatemala to kill a man. As the airplane banked, its descent through thick clouds brought the first view of her country in almost 20 years. Corrugated mountains, a trackless sea of green and brown. The plane drifted lower. Misty rectangles on hillsides resolved into a patchwork of fields and houses. A serpentine line became a road, a silver flash, a lake. Once at the gate, Luz joined the rolling waves of deflating passengers. They all shuffled up the jetway and along an interminable corridor to Luz's first hurdle, immigration. The tide carried her toward black swinging doors at the far end that swallowed each arrival and return. Then the doors flapped for her, and she emerged in a bright, echoing room. I really liked that Tracy went, oh. Yeah, okay, got a few other eyes up. Oh, okay, so now we know. It's the first two paragraphs. Why did Luz go back to Guatemala?
To kill a man.
To kill a man. But you still don't know why. Why is she going to kill this man? And what's going to play out in the course of the book? There are no surprises here. This is not twisted psychological suspense. I'm not really trying to mess with your mind. Okay? It follows a fairly normal progression of trying to kill a man, basically. Okay? First lines are really important. I'm sorry, Todd, did you? It's okay.
You know, the usual.
The usual, yeah, the usual. Actually, there's a funny. How many people here know know Sue Grafton, who wrote the Alphabet Murders? A is for Come on, guys.
No, right.
Yeah, okay. Or, you know why Sue Grafton started writing? She was plotting to kill her ex-husband. No, seriously, this is a fact. She told the story many times. She was plotting to kill her husband. She decided she'd mess it up, and that she'd better just write about it instead.
Oh, good.
Anyhow, I love that story. First lines are extremely important. Contemporary writers don't have the luxury of the 10-page introduction, you know, the why am I here and what changed in my life and where I'm going, and you know, it doesn't happen. So what we have to do, we've got basically 25 pages to engage a reader and make them want to know more. So you pretty much have to get your story organized in that point in time. I do like to talk about first lines a lot. Mine has actually been entered in the International Thriller Writers' Best First Lines competition. Well, because what do you know after the first line, right? Yeah, okay. So I'll tell you mine if you'll tell me yours, okay? My favorite first line of all time is The Last Camel Collapsed at Noon. It's a good one. Yeah. What do you know? Well, okay, what do you know from those 6 words?
There's a camel, and they're probably in a desert because the wood just died.
Yeah, the camel was there and it died. So what kind of situation are we in?
Dire.
Dire. Oh, that's the right word. Yeah, dire. We're in a really dire situation. It just takes 6 words to set it up. Isn't that great? Yeah. Anybody else wanted to do one? I'll have to keep doing mine if you don't.
It was the best of times.
There you go.
That's the only one.
That's the only one. Come on, Gina. Yeah, it was the best of. You get it. It was the darkest stormy night. Here's another one. Yeah, you get a little bit of 19th century, like whatever after. Well, what do you know from those 2 lines? Some wonderful things going on and some really horrible things going on. So it sets you right up. Happy families are all alike, but unhappy families are different in a lot of different ways. Somebody.
I always liked, there once was a boy named he used to scrub and he almost deserved it.
Where's that from?
That's Roger the Dawn Treader. from
Oh,
Narnia.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh,
It's not very illustrative of the book, but it's a very
but it's
good
a
line.
great, no, it's a great first line. I really do tend to notice them because I think they're extremely important. My favorite first line is from Ken Follett's The Key to Rebecca, okay, which is a really good book that deserves a second read if anyone hasn't read it. And then, of course, there's Rebecca itself. I dreamt I went to Manderley again last night. It sets up that whole like romantic, you don't know, whole romantic longing thing. Closest, the second favorite is I planned my death carefully. Unlike my life, which meandered from thing, I can't remember the last, from thing to thing, even though I tried hard to control it. Who wouldn't read that book? I planned my death carefully. What's she gonna do? Okay.
That sounds like Harold and Mark.
What's that from?
That's Margaret Atwood's, one of Margaret Atwood's early books, Lady Oracle. My therapist actually recommended it.
You really want to pay this lady?
I mean, why wouldn't she recommend a book about a really nutty writer who had trouble controlling her life? I'll leave you with that. Thank you. That's it for first lines, unless anyone wants to share any. I think they're really good. They're extremely important for setting the tone and the mood. The only other thing I really want to say about the book, I'm going to do a short reading in a second, is explain why I felt like I could write about a young Guatemalan girl. There's a lot of talk in the literary world these days. There's a whole hashtag, in our own voices. I mean, who gets to tell the story? Okay, and so why am I, an older, Caucasian woman? Why do I feel like I can tell this story in an honest way? And the answer goes back to my years of teaching. Okay, I taught ESL beginning in the Peace Corps, and I've taught it most of my adult life. My students are first-generation immigrants to the United States. They're people who didn't have the opportunity to go to school in English. They come as adults. I was in a community college, if I didn't say that before, so it was an inexpensive way for adults to come and learn some basic skills that they needed for carry out their jobs and their life. Over the years, there were waves of folks from different places. When I first started teaching, there were a lot of Asians, people from Vietnam and Cambodia. Okay, in the 90s, there were many Eastern Europeans were coming, Bosnians, lots of Bosnians in my class and so forth. And for the past several years, my students have mainly been Iraqis and Congolese. One of the things that happens after immigrants have been around for a while, their country, first of all, most of them are political refugees of one sort or another. Their countries calm down after a while. And they end up with a job and a life, and they start saving their money to go home. Okay. The Vietnamese in Congo, think about how much time, how much money to to go all the way back to Vietnam, but they'll go back. My Congolese students aren't going to go home anytime soon. It's still a war zone there, and nor are the Iraqis. But the going back took on this mythic thing, like going back home. Kids have grown up, their children who were born in this country by and large are going back to this place where they've never been before. The parents haven't been back. Everyone's changed. And I got to know my students really well because ESL's never the sort of cut and dried class like like calculus would be or something like that. Say that?
You're not diagramming sentences.
I am not diagramming sentences, no. And if I came in with a great lesson on gerunds and I had a student who, had a doctor's appointment and didn't know how to explain something, that was a lesson. That was a lesson of the day. If I could bring gerunds into it, well, that was great. But if not, that was what had to happen. And over time, because it was a community college, I actually ended up meeting a lot of their kids. And here, I'm getting a little too long-winded now, but I just want to say that those trips back to the home country were generally really traumatic on many different levels, which is not to say that some of the people who did it didn't have a wonderful time, they did it again, but the changes were hard to plan for in advance. Neither the folks, the parents who were my students, or their children knew exactly what to expect. And the kids had a harder time than their parents did typically because they had very little relationship with these countries. And I've heard these stories over and over again. So Luz, in my book, is like the children of my students, and I've known her, I've met her many, many times in the past 30 years that I've been teaching. So that's why I wanted to talk about that. I couldn't have written a book about a little indigenous girl that lived up in the mountains and hadn't done anything. A lot of what happens in the story, and let me get to the second reading, is because that she's switching cultures in the middle of her life. Okay, so I did chapter 1, and now I'm going to do... Ooh! Okay, chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. A cloud blew across the sun as Evan stepped from the bus. In the sudden change of light, the shabby city buildings glowed with haphazard splashes of paint, melon, lime, maize. Then a sudden drumroll of thunder rattled windows. All around him, people with cafe au lait faces and bright clothes paused and raised their eyes to the sky. Evan saw the scene as a mural extending larger than life along the wall of some grand public building. A mural he would paint one day, the vibrant and diverse people of Guatemala, his secret ambition that as yet existed only as a series of sketches. His old painting teacher's voice echoed like the refrain of a favorite song. To find a big picture, you must first go small. So Evan singled out a young Indian hunkering on the sidewalk, an infant cradled in a woven sling on her back. She wore a flowered huipil over a long lavender and red striped skirt, and she fanned a charcoal brazier on which sat a half-dozen ears of tiny mountain corn, the rest of her body motionless, her eyes toward heaven, waiting for rain. So, okay, quiz time. Who's Evan? Where is it? Let's start with where is Evan? He's, thank you, good, okay. Where's Evan? What does Evan want to do, or what is he?
He's a painter.
He's a painter. Good. Is Evan Guatemalan?
No.
Nope.
How do you know this? Okay. That's great. Okay. All right. Is Evan old or young?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you basing that on? What are you basing that on?
Ride the bus.
He's yes, he's riding a bus. Right. Okay. That's good.
He's idealistic, and he hasn't realized his
Junior in Guatemala.
Right.
And he's
Okay.
American.
Right. So, yes. Okay. Oh, you guys are great. Okay. So that is exactly right. Evan is a young American man. He's an expat living in Guatemala. And he, although the story is mainly Luz's story, it's told from the first-person point of view of both Luz and Evan. So we get to know him pretty well in the course of the story. Both of these young people are trying to negotiate their lives and renegotiate, I probably should have said their lives as a result of being sort of placed in a different culture. It's one of the things that I've decided that I do like most about experiencing other cultures. I don't think I have anything else that I want to tell you about the book. I'm pretty much done here.
Can I just add, I liked once you got to the artist part, that at the very beginning you talked about the splashes of color, you know, and I think,
thanks, Jane.
yeah, the artist. I mean,
The
I think
artist.
it tied it in.
Yeah,
with
thank
that
you.
nice imagery.
Good. Okay.
I'm curious.
Yes.
Travels in your time, young, going to Mexico primarily, and as an adult, going to lots of different places, you know, including, you know, Latin America and South America. And what made you decide to set your story in Central America versus some of these other places?
Okay, so you're asking a variation on the number one question that an author usually gets asked, which is what gave you the idea for your story. So is it okay if I answer that one instead? Okay.
I think that's the one you can answer. Go ahead.
It just makes it easier. Okay. I don't, like many authors can give you the two sentence, like, I knew I had to write this book when I fill in the blank. I couldn't do that. This is sort of like something that was a bit of an irritant that sort of nagged at me over the years. I was at a party at Carol Buckley's house in Newburyport sometime in the 90s, and there was a Middle Eastern dictator which was giving us all fits, and there was a political discussion, you know? It's like, what should we do? What could we do, you know? Take him out. Well, that's a page rip from the headlines, okay? Take him out. Well, you can't do that, you know, that's wrong. You can't do that, you'd be killed. Well, what if I didn't care? You know, what if it was so important to me that I didn't really care whether I died or not? And anyhow, the evening went on, and it wasn't a big, you know, it was just one of those things, but it sort of nagged at me over the years. I thought, well, is there anything that I care about so much that I'd be willing to, you know, die for, you know, kill for, die for? I don't know. Anyhow, it was just a real question. But to answer your question, I know absolutely nothing about the Middle East. But when I realized that I know a lot about a part of the world that has a very similar style of strongmen and civic violence and turmoil, I thought, aha, and that's really it. That's why Guatemala instead of, someplace else. Basically. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you.
So I wonder,
Yes.
did you think of writing the book for someone, and also is there a dedication?
There is a dedication. The dedication is to Bill, who's always supported me in everything I do, and I couldn't do it without him. Okay. I didn't write it for him, though. I just thanked him for it. Okay. No, I don't think I did, Gene. I really wrote it.
Scratch the itch.
Excuse me, to scratch an itch. Yeah, okay, that's a very inelegant way, but probably a pretty accurate way of putting
That's me.
it. I just wanted to write out some of those quandaries and questions that I had over that moral conundrum that had bugged me for so much time. Yeah, basically. KT.
I have a question about your writing process. As a podcaster like puts it, are you a planner or a pantser?
I'm a planner. Does that surprise anybody? No, I knew pretty much where the story was going when I started writing it, and things happened to change it. What some people don't know, I'm a very slow writer, and one of the things that kept me from writing novel-length fiction for many years was the fact that I'd still be on page 20 if I just kept correcting myself. I'm an endless, fussy, piddly rewriter, okay? I took a chance, and the novel, Toward the Light, was written in 30 days.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, did you name it Remo?
Yeah, I did it, and revised over 3 years.
Right.
And the point is, it just gets you out of yourself. You have to produce 50,000 words. I mean, it could be the word "the" 50,000 times, as they say to you. But you create something with what you know, and there's a lot of time pressure to just get it out. So what Toward the Light was, at the end of November of the year I wrote it, which I don't quite remember, it was about 6 years ago, was 50,000 words that included the beginning and the end, and a lot of the major scenes. I didn't worry about transitions, the dialogue was clunky, but I got the part that I knew of the story out, and then I revised it at leisure. Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Tracy?
Well, kind of, I was about to ask, what is your writing method? What is your work ethic when it comes to writing? How do you have your home set up? As an artist, I'm interested in
I don't
hearing that.
Bill and I live in a tiny house, Tracy, so I don't have that room of one's own that they talk about all the time. But what I do have is a couch with a view of this incredible view of the salt marsh. Okay, so I have this thing that changes on a daily basis, which I really like. I try to write in the mornings. You know, that time in the morning when you're just waking up and these things are sort of going around in your brain, sort of loosens things up a little bit. I tried to write early in the morning. Until recently I was teaching, but I had enough seniority that I was able to arrange my classes to be in the afternoon, so that worked really well for me. Cool. Thanks. Okay.
I have
David,
another
yeah?
question. So do many of your personal experiences, are they reflected in the book?
Not in this one.
Okay.
I've never tried to kill anyone.
Okay, I wasn't going to
No,
go there.
you were. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to turn it. I did mean to turn it into a joke, but yeah. No, this is pretty much a serious, serious work of fiction. The events. I did a lot of research for this. I don't know. I mean, okay, so I knew Guatemala, but I didn't know. I'm giving away a little bit to say I didn't know bombs. I don't know lockpicking. There's a lot of things I don't know that I had to do a lot of research on and stuff like that.
You probably interrogated Jeff about the painting.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about the development of your characters, just from teaching and from the students that you had. Are there any other characters in your book that are reminiscent of people you've known in your life or been influenced by?
So I get this question a lot, and I'm going to change my answer because I've realized something over the past week. It's really funny. So yeah, I didn't think that was the case. My son Jeff is a painter, and I used to say, "Oh, but it has nothing to do with Jeff. I only use Jeff because he explained the vocabulary to me. He made me feel like I could, talk like a painter." But darned if there isn't a little bit more of Jeff in there than I thought. Evan, the character Evan is a player. He would really like to, he's kind of cool guy, and he does remind me a little bit of Jeff. So he's not really my son, but along with knowing him, I've known a lot of other painters. So I guess I can say it's not just Luz that I've known, but I have known a lot of cool painters in my life. Yeah. Anybody in the back? You guys? You can be quiet? Okay. I think we're done here in that case, if nobody else wants to say anything. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.